Morning, my name's Simon. Welcome to Bennett's BikeSocial. Welcome to a fairly early start in southern Spain, and welcome to the launch of Honda's 2023 CB750 Hornet.
So here we are, the first few miles on Honda's 2023 Hornet CB750. That name, both of those names, carry a certain cachet with riders of a certain vintage. So the Hornet goes back to 1998, and the naked CBR 600, the CB750F, which is an inline 4, 90 horsepower, high revving, up to 12,000 RPM. It's a nice naked sort of all-rounder. The Hornet name made it sound like it was going to be a bit spiky and a bit aggressive, but it was actually anything but. People used them for commuting, sporting, recreation. They did have a race series for Hornets, but they were generally bought by lots and lots of different types of riders. It wasn't all about aggression and, kind of like angular stuff. And then there's CB750 for riders of an even greater vintage, which of course harks back to Honda's original superbike, the CB750 of 1969 was it? The early 70s? And of course, the thing that the Hornet and the CB750 had in common was they're both inline 4s. However, the 2023 CB750 Hornet is, drumroll, a parallel twin. Now, we've seen an awful lot of parallel twins lately, and they do make a lot of sense if you're looking to cut costs. They're quite cheap, easy to assemble, reliable, durable, and they're flexible in the sense that you can use them for a multitude of purposes. If you're into your platform engineering and having lots of different types of bike off one sort of frame and engine, then a parallel twin sort of fits the bill. You can put it in an adventure bike, you can put it in a naked bike, you can put it in a scooter, you can put it in a sporty sort of looking thing, so it has a lot of uses. So it kind of makes sense, I guess. So let's not get too weighed down with CB750, and let's not get too weighed down with the name Hornet. And let's just look at this bike as what it is. So parallel twin, 755cc, making, strangely enough, just over 90 horsepower at 9,500 RPM, and making, I think it's about 55 pound-foot of torque at, I think it's 7,250 RPM. Now that is quite high revs for peak torque. And for reference and context, Honda's NC750, similar capacity, makes its peak torque of about 51 pound-foot at something like just over 4,000 RPM. But, of course, because it makes its peak torque so low down, it doesn't make as much peak power. You're talking about 55 horsepower, I think, from an NC. So the Hornet is quite a high revving unit. And when you look at the bore and stroke measurements, that's exactly what it suggests that Honda have built. You're talking 87mm bore and a 63.5mm stroke. Now, at the risk of boring you to death and explaining it really badly while I'm trying to navigate a motorcycle down a Spanish road at nice pace actually, I'll give it a go. So bore and stroke is kind of when you're setting the engine architecture of a bike, it is one of the defining characteristics of the way its performance is going to be delivered, the kind of engine tune that you're going to give the bike. And the reason for that, hugely simplified, because that's kind of I'm fairly simple. Basically, a wide bore means effectively a large piston, a wide piston, and for a given cc, then it's going to need a short stroke, i.e. it's not going to move very far up and down in the bore. However, the opposite of that is a long stroke engine, which has, as it suggests, a long stroke and a narrow bore. And again, sort of greatly simplifying, but with a narrow bore, you haven't got a huge amount of valve area to get an awful lot of gas in and out, but also we have to slow down a little bit for some reason to let people catch up. Also, a long stroke means quite a high piston speed, because for a given RPM, it has to travel a long way in the bore and then stop and then reverse its direction and then go back up again. So you can't rev them very hard because piston stresses get too high. So what you tend to find is that long stroke engines, a bit like the NC700, which is actually a thing called under square, its stroke is actually longer than its bore is wide. And we have to slow right down here for some reason. So bikes like the NC700 have kind of lots of bottom end power. They're quite low revving engines, which if that's the kind of characteristic you want to achieve, then that's what you get. I mean, most motorcycles don't have under square engines these days because most of them do like to rev and make power. I suppose it's no coincidence that the NC700 was widely rumoured to be developed from half a Honda Jazz engine. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It might be apocryphal. But it certainly is a low revving thing. The polar opposite of a long stroke motor is a short stroke motor, which is where the piston doesn't travel very far in the bore and you have very wide pistons, which means you can rev it a lot harder, which is handy because you've also got a large amount of valve area because you've suddenly got a very wide piston. And so they rev, they like lots of revs, which means they make their peak torque quite high in the revs, and therefore you can get quite a lot of peak power out of them, but it is all at the top end. And the Hornet engine, for whatever reason Honda have decided, and hopefully we'll find out later on, is a very, very short stroke engine. In fact, if you look at the bore to stroke ratio, which in a perfectly square engine would be 1:1, oh blimey, he was going a bit wide there, dude. The Hornet has the highest bore to stroke ratio of any parallel twin currently in production, which is quite a claim. It's got a higher ratio than KTM's 890 Duke, than Aprilia's RS6, more than anything. It is the highest. I believe there may have been some little 250 parallel twins back in the day that were more extreme and revved even harder. But in current production, I stand to be corrected. Please leave a comment down below if I'm wrong. I think it's about 1.37 from memory. But anyway, what does that mean? So that means in its engine character, the Hornet should be a fairly revvy little beast. And I must admit, it doesn't feel, I mean, I'll talk about how the bike feels at the end of the ride, but just like this, that has got plenty of bottom end to it, but it is definitely quite a revvy motor. You can definitely feel it's not peaky, but it has got some, you do have to sort of rev it to get it to go. It likes a bit of gear swapping. Anyway, so there we go, that's your engine for you. Twin balancer shaft, 270 degree crank, like they all are these days. And let's move on to the chassis, which is a lot less interesting. It's a steel tube frame, all new, completely new. We have 41mm unadjustable Showa forks at the front, and we have preload only adjustable, I assume it's Showa Origin rear shock at the back, but Honda don't call it Showa, so who knows where it's come from. Again, unadjustable. We have 296mm frilly front discs with Nissin 4-pot radial calipers, which feel pretty sharp to me. We have a 15.2 litre fuel tank, and Honda claim you can get 200 miles from it at their fuel consumption figures, which is about over 60 miles to the gallon, which I'm not entirely sure is actually possible with this kind of riding, because the average is about 45.1, it says there, which would put the tank range much more into the 140-150 mile territory before a refill. And well, there's one more thing about the engine which is a little bit interesting and worthy of note. Honda say that it's got twin vortex suction channels in the intakes, which is slightly confusing, but what it actually sounds like something out of Doctor Who.
Vortex manipulator, cheap and nasty time travel, very bad for you.
But what it actually is the air intake, the air is guided on each side of the intake, sort of left and right, through, I guess you call them circular channels. It's a little bit like a static supercharger in a way. And the idea is to spin the air up as it enters the airbox and make it turbulent, because turbulent air, and increases the velocity as well, so you're fast travelling air and it's more turbulent. And Honda say that's really good for extending the bottom end sort of performance of the engine. And to keep the top end, there is a third duct, sort of for when the thing's at wide open throttle. which does suggest that they kind of knew that they built a fairly peaky top Endy motor. Anyway, back to the chassis. We've done the chassis, we've done the suspension. Let's do the weight, which is 190 kilos. Again, at 90 horsepower, Honda claim that it's got the highest power to weight ratio in its class, and I think they claim it's got the highest torque to weight ratio as well. I mean, the original Hornet 600 inline 4, I think it weighed about just over 200 kilos dripping wet, and this is 190, so it is significantly lighter. And it comes with a 160 section rear tyre. 160 section is quite narrow. It's been a long time since I've had a bike, a 750 with a 160 section rear on it. But anyway, all that is to make it even more agile, and this thing really is flickable. I mean, it just wants to fall on its ear. It's really nice, actually. I wish we had some traffic to ride it through. Yeah, you see, that's got a bit of boom to it. So yes, sorry, I'm getting distracted by having a lovely ride. Easily done. What else have we got to talk about? So we've done fuel control. Oh yeah, electronics. Look at that dash. Now, is that not fairly pretty? There's something, I mean, it's familiar because it's similar to Africa Twins, NT1100s. It's not touch sensitive. CB1000R has got the same sort of dash. I believe it originated on the RCV 213S and has sort of filtered down across the range. But anyway, and I'll get to the price in a minute, this does have an awful lot of stuff on it for the price. It's got 4 riding modes. I think we're in user at the moment, which I've set up to have maximum engine braking, which I quite like, and maximum power, minimum traction control. But you can dial, oh there we go, classic bibbing horn. You can dial all that in and out. And you can change the modes quite easily, unlike the Africa Twin, which is a bit of a faff. There we go, there's a bit of a sport, there's a bit of a standard, and there's rain. And you can also change the type of display, which is quite nice as well. So yeah, that's a lot of sort of functionality for the price. There's no cruise control, which is a bit of a bummer, because there is nothing saves a license in an average speed camera zone like having cruise control. You can just bang it on and forget about having to do your 50 miles an hour or whatever it is. This bike's got a quick shifter, which doesn't come as standard, but it's an up and down quick shifter, and it's really good. So I think that's about 250 quid extra. And there are various sports packs. Again, I can't remember the prices. I don't know the prices, they haven't been announced yet. If I find out, I'll put them in the description. There's a sport pack, there's a touring pack that comes with panniers, and I think there's a style pack that comes with like a bikini, little screen, little fly screen and some other stuff. But I'll explain all that in the description. So, anyway, I think I've just reached the end of the spec. I'm not entirely sure there's anything left to tell you. So, I'm going to carry on riding, and I'm going to get back to you later on with a bit more of a clue as to what this thing feels like.
I think I've parked this bike on a wasp nest. There's loads of wasps, which would be ironic, wouldn't it, if I got stung reviewing a Honda Hornet. I'll struggle on and see what happens. Anyway, I'm like a stuck record. Here we are in beautiful southern Spain, in this beautiful weather, riding on this beautiful Spanish blacktop on Honda's new CB750 Hornet. And I've banged on at length about the engine spec during the riding section, desperately trying to explain bore-stroke ratio and probably failing and being completely incoherent. But when I looked at the spec of the bike, that was kind of one of the first things that jumped out at me, was that, wow, this is a short-stroke engine. But it is not the defining characteristic of the bike once you're rolling. The thing that this bike really does impress upon you is how agile it is. I mean, it is compact, and it is small, and it is sharp steering. I really like it. I haven't had any vague feeling from the steering at all. It hasn't given me any moments. I love the way it literally just falls on one ear, falls on the other ear, does exactly what the Japanese, what the Honda engineers say it should, which is that kibi, I think, which is their philosophy of a bike that goes from, from one side to the other really quickly. This does that. It is sharp steering, assisted by that rear 160 section Michelin, which is a little bit odd because when you're following a load of other bikes, you're normally looking at a big fat 180 section on pretty much whatever you're riding these days. And so to follow this with a bunch of with a 160 on it, and you're kind of thinking, oh, what classic bike is that? When was the last time a 750 had a 160 section rear tyre? Well, you must be going back to the 80s for that. But anyway, it certainly does help the thing steer. It is supremely agile. I'd like to ride it in traffic. All the stuff we've been on today has been this really smooth flowing Spanish blacktop where you're just kind of like I say, leaning from one side to the other. What we haven't been doing is riding it through traffic, which I think this bike would absolutely slay. And we haven't done anything sort of extended high speed on motorways or anything. So there we go. Right, let's talk about the engine because there is an engine. Super smooth, this parallel twin. Really, really smooth. Twin balancer shaft. It's quite fruity. This makes a nice noise. In terms of its power characteristics, again, you would suspect it to be more top-endy, and it is. And I don't want to make it sound like it's Peaky, because it is not a Peaky engine. But it hasn't got that same kind of low-geared instant funk that you get off an MT-07, where the thing just wants to wheelie straight away. It's like, what? It's really good fun. This is a bit more of a considered power curve, a bit more of an extended power curve, and it has got... if you're in top gear thudding along at 60, 70 miles an hour and you want to overtake a car, you do have to bang it down a bit just to get it going, get it flying. But it's not a Peaky engine. In terms of sort of context, if you put a KTM 890 Duke up here, which is quite a seriously fun engine, and your MT-07 down here, which is a seriously fun engine, if you can see the difference, then the Honda kind of sits in the middle. The 90 horsepower is the equivalent of what the Hornet 600 was making back in the day. So it's not underpowered. But like I say, the really strange thing is the size of the bike. Like I say, 750s used to be big machines. This ain't a big machine, which is great because it opens it up to all kinds of riders, exactly the kind of all kinds of riders who rode the original 600 Hornet. It was bought by a wide range of people. What have we got? 795mm seat height, 795, which is lower than the MT-07, I think, or it's about equivalent. And it does look quite low. Again, I've heard a couple of other riders on the launch saying, oh, do you do a high seat version? I'm 6 foot and it hasn't cramped me at all, but I do feel like it's quite an active position. The pegs are quite a long way back. You go straight onto the balls of your feet and you are sort of like poised on the bike. But to me, it's kind of part of the ethos of what this is about. It is, kind of a Hornet after all. It is supposed to be at least a little bit active and a bit like, yeah, come on, let's have some fun. And it's good for that. So there we go. So that's the riding position, not particularly uncomfortable. It is kind of that classic Honda thing, really, where you get on it and you just go, yeah, that fits. That's how it's supposed to be. That's ergonomics. That works. What else have we got? What we spend most of our time looking at, apart from the road, hopefully, are the clocks. The clocks are really nice. It's a standard display, which we're well familiar with CB1000Rs and the Africa Twins and the NT1100s. But this one is actually, it's kind of crisper somehow. It's got a little bit more sort of definition to it. It's a really pleasant thing to look at, and it's got a high degree of customization, and all of the screens look really nice. So that's pretty cool. Again, at this price point, which I'll get to in a minute, that's quite impressive. The switchgear feels nice. It's kind of Africa Twin styly, but it hasn't got a million buttons. They've kind of slimmed it down a bit, so it's quite easy to navigate your way around. Hasn't got cruise control, which is a bit of a bind because, I don't know, the jury's still out for a lot of people on cruise control, but I'm telling you, when you're stuck in an average speed camera doing 50, it is useful. It's a license saver, so it's definitely worth having for that, if not for just, resting this. What else have we got to talk about? Tank, 15.2 litres. Honda claiming 200 miles out of the tank is a bit extreme. I think you'd have to really, really nurse it and go right the way to running it dry to get 200 miles. I think 150 is probably nearer the truth. Again, it's all dependent on the kind of riding you do. The sort of riding we've been doing has been fairly hectic, to be perfectly honest. So that was that. What else we got? Everything else is just so Honda. It just kind of works. If I think of anything, I'll mention it. But let's talk about the price. £6,999 is crazy cheap, really. I think, don't quote me, but if you did like a reverse inflation calculator, a bike that costs sort of 7 grand today, if you went back to the 90s when the Hornet 600 was launched, the equivalent price of this would be 3.5 grand, which kind of gives you an impression of how much good value it is. I mean, 7 grand is a lot of money today, no question of that. But relative to everything else, that's pretty cheap for what you're getting. 90 horsepower, which is the same as the old Hornet, with modern brakes, modern tyres, modern suspension, even if it is a 160, not a 180. Yes, so there we go. That's as much as I can think of off the top of my head about riding the Honda Hornet CB750. Does it justify the name? Does it live up to the Hornet tag? I don't know why they used it, because it does bring baggage with it, a bit like the CB750. I mean, kind of, call it something else. There's plenty of other names that you could have picked. But, as long as you're an old giffer like me and you don't remember the Hornet particularly well, then it's just a name. As a bike, yeah, it's a little bit more, it's got a bit more about it. It's got quite a lot more about it than an MT-07 in everything except that instant fun factor. But it has got, like I say, other attributes that would take it away from an MT-07, and it's not as intimidating and top-endy and gnarly as something like an 890 Super Duke. And I'm sure there's plenty of other models in between. Anyway, I've been rambling on for far too long. I haven't been stung yet, so now it's probably a good time to stop. If you've got any questions, stick them in the boxes down below and I'll do my best to answer them. However, if you want to read a much more considered review, then go to bikesocial.co.uk, where I'll write something that makes a bit more sense than this nonsense I've just been rambling about. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Oh, I beg your pardon. Bit more choking at the start.